In this episode, we're going to take the messy, sometimes chaotic act of collecting threat information and turn it into something that feels calm, repeatable, and reliable. New learners often imagine collection as a heroic hunt where an analyst finds one perfect clue and solves the case. But real collection is closer to running a well-organized kitchen during dinner rush. When collection is ad hoc, you miss things, you duplicate effort, and you can't explain later why you trusted one source but ignored another. When collection is systematized, you can move faster without becoming sloppy, and you can scale the work across days, teammates, and changing priorities. The goal here is not to make you rigid or bureaucratic, but to give you workflows that can grow with you, so your collection stays consistent even when the volume and complexity increase. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good place to start is by being clear on what collection actually means, because beginners often mix it up with analysis or investigation. Collection is the act of gathering raw material that might answer an intelligence question, such as logs, alerts, reports, or observations from outside sources, and bringing it into a place where it can be evaluated. The important word is might, because collection is intentionally broad, and you do not yet know what will matter. That uncertainty is normal, and the workflow exists to manage it so you do not get overwhelmed by noise. Systematizing collection means you create a routine that decides what to gather, when to gather it, how to label it, and how to store it so it can be used later. When you do this well, you spend less time hunting for lost context and more time turning information into useful decisions. Repeatable collection begins with the idea of a requirement, which is a plain language statement of what the intelligence work needs to answer. This requirement does not have to be fancy, and it should not sound like a legal document, but it must be specific enough that you can tell whether your collection is helping or not. If the requirement is too broad, collection turns into hoarding, where you gather everything because you cannot justify gathering something smaller. If the requirement is too narrow, you blind yourself and miss related signals that would have clarified the situation. A strong requirement gives you boundaries without trapping you, because it points you toward a set of likely sources and a reasonable time window. Once you have that, you can build a workflow that ties every collection action back to a requirement so the work stays purposeful. From there, you want to separate sources into two practical categories: routine sources and on-demand sources. Routine sources are the ones you collect from on a schedule because they continuously help you, like internal telemetry, recurring reports, or consistent external feeds that have proven value. On-demand sources are the ones you consult when a specific question comes up, like checking an infrastructure record, a specific incident artifact, or a niche community report that is relevant only sometimes. This distinction matters because it shapes your workflow, and it prevents a common beginner problem where every collection task feels urgent and manual. If you treat everything as on-demand, you live in constant interruption and you never build momentum. If you treat everything as routine, you waste time collecting things you will never use. A scalable workflow respects both, automating or scheduling the routine work mentally, even if the mechanics are simple, and preserving attention for the on-demand work. Another foundational concept is that collection is not just about grabbing data. It is about capturing context at the same time. Context includes where something came from, when it was collected, why it was collected, and what question it was meant to support. If you skip that context, you create orphaned facts that look interesting but cannot be trusted or explained later. This is where many teams stumble, because under pressure it feels faster to copy a chunk of information and move on. The cost shows up later when you cannot remember whether a detail was observed internally, inferred, or borrowed from an outside report. A repeatable workflow bakes context into the act of collection so you do not have to rely on memory. Over time, that habit becomes the difference between work that can be handed off cleanly and work that collapses when the original collector is unavailable. To make that real, imagine you collect a suspicious domain observed in internal logs and also see it mentioned in an external report. Those two observations are not the same thing, even if they contain the same characters. The internal observation has your environment's timestamp, the system that saw it, and the surrounding activity, while the external mention has the author's credibility, their evidence standard, and their publication timing. A scalable workflow treats these as separate items that can later be linked, rather than one blended note that loses its history. That might sound like extra work, but the payoff is that you can reason about what you truly know versus what someone else claims. When you eventually write intelligence or brief a stakeholder, that clarity is what keeps you from overstating the case. Systematized collection is the discipline of keeping those threads intact from the start. Now, let's talk about the flow of a collection workflow, because beginners often think of workflows as rigid checklists, and that is not the goal here. A good workflow is more like a conveyor belt with a few clear stages: intake, normalization, triage, storage, and review. Intake is the moment information enters your world, whether it is pulled from a system, received from a person, or discovered through research. Normalization is where you make it comparable, which might be as simple as standardizing names, timestamps, and labels so you can later sort and search. Triage is the early decision about whether it seems relevant enough to keep moving forward or whether it belongs in a lower priority bucket. Storage is putting it somewhere consistent with the context attached. Review is the habit of looking back, spotting patterns, and adjusting what you collect based on what actually helps. Normalization sounds technical, but at the beginner level it is mostly about consistency, not automation. If one day you label an item as phishing and another day you label something similar as email threat, you make it harder to search your own work later. If you record dates sometimes as month and day and other times as full timestamps, your timeline gets messy. If you refer to the same organization with different names, you will miss connections that were right in front of you. A repeatable workflow uses a small set of categories that you stick to, even when you are tired or rushed. This is not about being perfect. It is about being predictable so your future self can make sense of what your past self did. Triage is where scale really starts to matter, because the world will always produce more potential information than you can analyze. Beginners sometimes feel guilty discarding things, as if every clue should be saved, but disciplined collection includes disciplined letting go. A scalable triage habit asks a few simple questions. Does this relate to an active requirement? Does it appear to be unique? Does it have enough context to be meaningful? And does it suggest action or further investigation? If the answer is mostly no, the item can be parked in a low-priority place without consuming mental energy. Parking is not the same as deleting, and it is an important psychological trick for staying productive. The workflow gives you permission to defer without forgetting, which keeps you from chasing every shiny object. Storage is not just where you put things. It is how you make them retrievable and usable by someone else. A beginner can think of storage as the single source of truth for what has been collected, where each entry includes the artifact and its context. The consistent location matters because scattered notes across devices, chat threads, and random documents do not scale. The consistent naming matters because even a great artifact is useless if you cannot find it later. The consistent linking matters because the value of collection grows when you connect related items across time and across sources. Your workflow should create a predictable path from requirement to collected items to later analysis, so you can trace your reasoning and show your work. That traceability is what turns collection from a personal habit into a team capability. Once you have those stages, you can make the workflow repeatable by anchoring it to time and triggers. Time-based routines are things you do daily, weekly, or per shift, like reviewing a set of routine sources or checking whether new material arrived. Trigger-based routines happen when something occurs, like an alert spike, a stakeholder question, or a new campaign being reported. The mistake beginners make is treating every trigger as an emergency that overrides the routine, which breaks your system and creates burnout. A scalable approach blends the two by preserving a small, steady cadence while allowing spikes to temporarily increase attention. Over time, this makes you resilient because your workflow continues even when the environment is noisy. Consistency is not about doing everything every day. It is about having a reliable pattern that adapts without falling apart. A powerful way to scale is to design your workflow so it can be handed off, even if you are a team of one right now. That means writing down your categories, your intake sources, and your triage rules in a way that another person could follow. It also means using language that is simple and unambiguous, like describing what you did and why, rather than leaving cryptic hints. Beginners sometimes think this is overkill, but it is actually a learning tool because it forces you to be explicit about your own thinking. If you cannot explain why you collected something, you probably collected it for the wrong reason or without enough context. When you can explain it, you build confidence and you make your future analysis faster. Scalable workflows are often just workflows that are explainable. Another common scaling challenge is duplication, where the same item enters your workflow multiple times from different sources. Duplication is not always bad, because repeated citings can increase confidence, but it becomes wasteful when you repeatedly process the same thing as if it is new. A repeatable workflow reduces duplication by using consistent identifiers and by checking whether an item already exists before creating a new entry. When you do need multiple entries, you link them rather than merging them into one confusing blob. This preserves source context while still showing that the items relate. Over time, this linking creates a map of evidence that helps you see which ideas are supported broadly and which ideas rely on a single weak mention. That kind of evidence awareness is the bridge between collection and sound analysis. You also want to plan for quality control, because scale without quality becomes a faster way to be wrong. Quality control in collection is not about perfection. It is about catching obvious errors and preventing sloppy habits from spreading. A simple quality check might mean verifying that timestamps are recorded, confirming that the source is noted, and ensuring that the item is categorized consistently. Another check might involve sampling your routine sources and asking whether they still provide value, because sources can degrade over time or drift away from your needs. A scalable workflow includes a periodic review where you prune low-value sources and strengthen the ones that consistently help. This keeps your collection pipeline from clogging, which is a subtle problem that can make you feel busy while producing little intelligence value. As you systematize collection, you will also notice a shift in how you think about effort. Instead of spending energy deciding from scratch what to do each time, you let the workflow make routine decisions for you. That frees your attention for the harder parts, like interpreting ambiguous signals or deciding what question to ask next. Beginners often believe that expertise is about knowing more facts, but in intelligence work, expertise is often about having better habits for managing uncertainty. A repeatable workflow is one of those habits because it reduces the chance that stress and time pressure will make you careless. It also makes your work more defensible because you can show that you followed a consistent process rather than improvising based on mood. That defensibility matters when your outputs influence real decisions. Finally, it helps to remember that systematizing collection is not a one-time project. It is a living practice that you tune over time. Early on, your workflow might be simple and mostly manual, but the principles still hold. Clear requirements, consistent intake, normalized labels, disciplined tree-off, reliable storage, and periodic review. As you grow, you can add complexity where it truly helps, not where it just looks impressive. The best workflows feel lightweight while still being strict about what matters, especially context and traceability. When you get that balance right, you can handle more information without losing your footing, and you can scale from personal competence to team capability. That is the real promise of systematized collection. You build a system that supports your judgment instead of constantly testing your endurance.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.